and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined, as always, by James and Alan. It's been weirdly the longest and quickest week of my Celtic supporting life. When we recorded last Tuesday, Brendan Rodgers had just been sacked and all of that stuff, which feels like a long time ago now, and we are now in the midst of what I've called the Martin O'Neill Renaissance. Some people have told me to calm down, but as anybody knows, that is not what I tend to do in these situations. James, how are you doing? Obviously, Blue Jays collapse aside, obviously.
Yeah, I joked using the Seinfeld story about me having the ups and the downs. So my world's flipped over the weekend. So a historic, I wouldn't even call it a collapse. I think it was just a really tough, historic, classic game, but came out on the wrong side of it. So that was very disappointing and upsetting. But then the next morning for that semifinal to work out the way it did, flipped me right back to even. So that helped. It was a nurturing development on Sunday to turn the weekend from a real turd into at least a decent one.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody listening or watching, James was trying to explain exactly what happened during the World Series game to Alan and myself. And I think, Alan, our summation of it was man hit stick, not good. Don't know.
Yeah, lots of bad stuff happened. That was all I could take from it, really. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't really understand why you would be upset at losing. I mean, given how long the season is, isn't that like their 100th loss of the season, maybe? You know,
No, how dare
when you got to the final.
No, probably maybe 60th loss, something like that.
But you lose 60 games and you
within 65, a hit. Maybe 70. Yeah.
Jesus. Yeah.
It's a hey, they do the marathon in the Olympics, Alan. You know, some sports are set up to be a marathon. Some are intermediate distance.
2 hours.
Yep. Yeah.
I have been to a baseball match, and it was, as I've said before, the Blue Jays, and I can say from experience it was a marathon.
Well,
still don't know what happened.
I have to say they've sped it up with some rule changes. That's been a very good thing, particularly for people that are attending games live. But I will say, I mean, just because of Canada being involved, predominant, or I shouldn't say predominant, major contributors and stars from Japan on the Dodgers team. I think their ratings for Game 7 were twice as much as any NBA final game of recent history, any big college football game. So, it definitely captivated a lot of people that, and there's a sports broadcaster in the U.S. that I listen to who I think summarized it. I share this view, is that baseball at its highest level, and to your point, Alan, you play that many games, it's not often you get that highest level, but at its various highest level, I don't think there's a sport that's more dramatic in something like a Game 7 and a competitive close. It's just the drama throughout the full game. It's just your pins and needles on every pitch. It's just they got jabbed and stabbed in the eyeballs about 6 times within a half hour at the end. So those pins and needles turned into horrible weapons.
Well, if
now
you want
now you know how the Rangers fans feel, don't you?
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. We will go into that.
Let's move it along.
Yeah. Although I have to say, James, if you do want drama, watch the 1985 World Snooker Championship final. That is drama.
Yeah. That's
but anyway. But Alan, I'll come to you first. Everybody, as we know, will be watching and listening to this, wanting to know yours and James's thoughts on the outcome of the semi-final. We beat Rangers 3-1 at Hampden. Wasn't quite as simple as the scoreline would suggest. But what was your overall thoughts on the game before we get into some of the more nitty-gritty of it?
Yeah, I think the key is you have to remember it's a semi-final. So as much as I think that the outcome of this is quite important from I use the word momentum, how people are feeling about themselves, etc. I think it's very important the way that both teams have been feeling about their season so far to get some sort of good feeling into the season. is not to be underestimated. It is a semi-final, and semi-finals can be really, really tricky for all sorts of different reasons. I think we can't forget that. It was a very bizarre game, really. I mean, sort of 3.5 to 2.5 XG. I don't know. I've not had time to go back and check whether any derby of recent times has had that volume of chances and XG, if you like, across both teams. I suspect not. And it did strike me it was almost a sort of back to the early 2000s type of game. Before the likes of Rafa Benitez and Jose Mourinho introduced control into football. I suspect a lot of games were like this, where the teams were a little bit stretched. There's lots of spaces, and it was quite direct as well. Not what we're used to, really. So that was quite interesting. I don't know if that was by design. Just speaking earlier there, when one team's down to 10, it's very difficult to take tactical signals from it in terms of what we think future performance might be like. It's really more about responding to how the teams played on the day, given the conditions. I think some credit is due to Danny Rowe. He went 4-3-2. We remember Rodgers doing that at Ibrox after I think it was Simunjevic got sent off and ended up winning the game doing that. So he kept it positive in that regard, keeping two players high up the pitch and looked to hit them kind of early. So that added an interest to the game, and I think helped to keep it competitive in that sense. Lots of missed chances, lots of refereeing controversies, which we'll come to as well. So it was a hell of a game, really, very dramatic. And as I say, I'm not sure. I think it'll be fun to discuss, but I don't think there's going to be any season-shaping conclusions to be drawn from it. Such was the sort of random nature of what went on.
Yeah, I mean, apart from anything, chances are we're not going to have the same two men in the dugout in a couple of months' time. So any chance of any season-defining lessons are few and far between. But James, to pick up on what Alan was saying there, in comparison to the game in August, I mean, unbelievable in terms of the level of entertainment and the styles of both teams in trying to make something of the game.
I mean, you couldn't have written a script for drama and with Martin O'Neill's return, and I mean, it was like a storybook. Not the ending even. I mean, just as Alan suggested. I mean, not only was it just his arrival and his persona there, but the nature of the game and it being this kind of chaotic back and forth and the verticality. And I'll get into it in a little bit about why I think some of that happened. But I think probably the one thing because Laura, your point's a vital one, particularly on the side from Celtic's perspective, assuming that, there's going to be a managerial change. I think we did learn some things about role. And I think, we did a kind of a bumper preview episode on Extra Time to our subscribers recorded it last Thursday. And, Alan's more familiar with them, living in Sheffield and having seen him managing there to a degree, and was quite flattering. I think that's fair, right, Alan? And your expectation and portrayal of him, and my kind of cursory, lesser look at him certainly fit with that. And I have to say I was pretty impressed in the game, and I'll go over some of that too, is that I think there was one stretch after the red card that he got caught with his pants down, I think, a little bit. And I'll show you a couple of screenshots on why I think that. But other than that, and I think they were surprised by our setup, and I'll show some screenshots on that too in the first 15 to 20 minutes. He made some tweaks, and as Alan said, he made tweaks at halftime to come out 4-3-2 to kind of rectify the issues post red card. And yeah, so I would say ultimately, if a team's down to 10 men for, what was it, 90 minutes total, something like that, to even have a chance at winning in this situation, I think, unless it's all random. So it wasn't like this would not have been a theft win if they would have won this game. Like, they had a lot of really good chances, as Alan said, with the XG. So they created far better quality chances in this game than they have all season. That was a horrible, pathetic aspect of the Martin regime, was how poor they were at creating chances, and they squandered them, thankfully, in this game, and some combination of that and Schmeichel making some really good saves. So yeah, I think that's the one aspect, is that it was like, oh, this Rule guy's probably, at least a competent manager, if not potential would be more than that.
Yeah, I think the thing with Schmeichel, I was sitting watching the game with my brother, and the thing about Schmeichel is we can all have our question marks about his distribution and his passing, and perhaps his mobility and ability to save shots from further out. But one-on-one, close up with strikers, he's still one of the best possibly in the world at that, and that kind of Schmeichel star shape that's in his DNA is there for all to see. But Alan, before we get into some of the more intricate aspects of what James was talking about with his screenshots, you were talking about before we started the recording the kind of difference between the first half hour of play before the sending off and afterwards, and how difficult it is to stick to a game plan when something like that happens. What were the differences you saw there in terms of, the before and after, and how we had to change our approach to the game?
So yeah, just to sort of recap in terms of, and again, you need to be careful not to draw definitive conclusions from a home game against Falkirk that you win 4-0, but still there was some obvious differences in how Celtic set up and played in that game versus going back the totality of Postecoglou and Rodgers' second seasons, right, which I would classify as being sort of on the more extreme end of positional play. The level of directness, the total volume of passes was way down. The level of number of long balls was way up. We're not playing long ball football. It's just on a relative basis, as we always say, it was a lot more direct. There was a lot more width put into the game. The wingers and the fullbacks held wider positions, and that was there for all to see again on Sunday, because, as Martin O'Neill knows from painful experience, as somebody who played a lot of 3-5-2 at Leicester City and also early on in his Celtic career, when teams set up as a 4-3-3 or a 3-4-3 in this case, or at least put width into the game, you can pull the centre backs out of position, you can pin the wing backs back by playing balls over the top into the corners. That's what Celtic did to, Alex McLeish's team, Rangers team, famously had kind of mastered that a little bit in their treble-winning season over O'Neill's side, and O'Neill kind of shifted more to a 4-4-2 thereafter, or a variant thereof, and so Celtic were very effective, really, in pinning the two wing backs back and getting Tanetki and Maeda right on the touchline, getting the fullbacks wide and getting the ball up the channels and quite directly. And I think that was paying off dividends. And then once the ball was up there, he then pressed very aggressively, because Giga, Suter are not quick and they're not great on the ball when under pressure. Suter's a very good passer when given time and space to get his head up and ping a long pass, but if you put him under pressure, he's not so good. And Giga doesn't look like a very good footballer, just at all. And they really went after him in a big way. And I think that a lot of trouble for them came through Celtic pressurising the right-hand side of their defence, which, and as we know, Tavernier, it's not the best part of his game. I mean, credit to him overall, he was by a distance their most effective player, and he didn't even play right back for the vast majority of the game. In fact, he was playing centre midfield for a lot of it. And he was, as I say, his numbers, he was by far the best player, and that's an interesting one given how much they hound him, really. And he's 34. So that was their kind of early setup, and I think that, and again, I don't want to decry or damn with faint praise to say that's a simple and obvious way to play against the way that the Rangers set up with this 3-4-3 sort of shape. But it is an obvious way to play against that system, and we did it, and it made perfect sense. And again, it's that refreshing. This is an obvious way to play against the system, so that's the way we're going to do it. That's just common sense, I'll call it. I think we got a bit. We didn't get complicated under Rodgers. We just didn't adapt. We just insisted on doing the same thing. O'Neill's looked at it and gone, well, it was not that so much against Falkirk, but we're just going to do more of it, and we're going to do it earlier, because that's going to turn their their defence, and it's going to get us up the field, and then we'll fight for second balls. And as I say, for 30 odd minutes, that pretty much pinned them back quite well. The concern throughout the game for a team that is, as I say, arguably the worst in the whole league at creating chances. I mean, it's astonishing given the money they've spent on forward players, but they are, we allowed them to create through simple through balls, allowed them to create a number of chances, and that was the most worrying aspect of that.
Yeah, James, I guess this is a good time as any to get into some of your screenshots and some of the observations you have about the shapes throughout the match. For anybody watching or listening, these screenshots will, as always, be available on the huddlebreakdown.com Substack after. So why don't you talk us through some of the observations you've seen and how they affected either us or Rangers in the way that we approached the match?
Yeah, we'll start with Rangers because I agree with Alan. The interesting part about this was that both teams seemed to have out of possession tactics and shape that were smart relative to the opposition that they were likely to face, which I agree with Alan as well, that Rodgers basically had become 4-4-2 out of possession. Little tweaks here and there, but generally it was just the way it was. Hatate was up front with the striker, and then you'd have the bank of four, and then the bank of four. So we'll start with Rangers out of possession here, and it's just, again, I'm just doing screenshots here. I don't want copyright issues. So what you can see here is, and we talked about this on the preview show, is that at least in their game against Hibs, he's been tinkering a little bit, experimenting. We went over all of that, but they had basically set up in a 5-2-3 out of possession against Hibs. And again, I'm not an expert on tactics, but if you read a little bit about tactics, that's kind of one of the out of possession shapes that teams have adopted to combat 4-3-3 positional play type teams like we are, and have been. So, and why is that? Well, you have the two sitting midfielders that match up with the attacking eights. You have the central guy in the front three that man marks the sitting midfielder, i.e. McGregor. And then you have the two of the front three, the outside guys that are kind of there to press the center backs. The issue then, as Alan said, is that there's a lot of space out wide, and that you have the potential for confusion between the right and left center backs who jump into midfield at times, communicating with those just two central midfielders, and then with the wide forwards that have to get back. And there's a lot of rotation that goes on potentially. And I think you saw that at times, particularly in the first half, where it looked to me like they're still figuring stuff out. Tavernier yelling at Jigba because somebody's not going to the right place. And so I think they're still working out the kinks. So this was generally to be expected. At least I thought it was to be expected. This is another example of why I thought Rule, was set up pretty smartly, because if you look at our first half before they went down to 10 men, we didn't really produce anything other than when they made big mistakes, and they did, right? So this is back down its point. Jigba had a couple of howlers, misplayed balls. You had, Butland putting them under pressure with really bad distribution out from the back. You had the set piece that should have been a goal. We'll get into that later, where they fell asleep and we took a fast one. Raskin and Suter had their heads up their butts, weren't paying attention. There was that kind of stuff where most of our attacking threat occurred because they just were really bad. It wasn't because of structure from the way their manager had them set up. It was kind of individual errors. So that was the first one. And, they kind of set up in this 5-2-3, and I thought it was pretty effective in nullifying us and build up. The other thing I'll say that was, I thought, really smart, and again, speaks to me that Rule kind of knows what he's doing and does his homework, is not only did they have the 5-2-3, but they made Diomande the jumping, pressing of the two central midfielders, and they set up almost as if they were ignoring angles and build up. So they and I'll get into this Thursday when we go more in depth and extra time, but the amount of times that they basically just left angles alone in space in central midfield, almost daring us to pass the ball to them, was, regular. And that was because Diomande was jumping the center back or even going all the way up to press the keeper. And, I've been pointing it out really since we signed Engels, that's his weakest part of his game, I think anyway, is his ability to play back to the goal, be productive and build up, the touching, the half turns, all the stuff that Hatate does, for example, that we talk about in being, one touch and rolling defenders and that kind of stuff, not Engels' strength. So again, that was a hint to me. It's like, okay, if I was going to game plan pressing triggers and leave a guy open, he's the guy I probably would leave open. And that's how they had it set up. So again, that's all within this first 38 minutes. Out of possession for Celtic. Next, this was a surprise, I thought. This was not the 4-4-2. We basically set up out of possession more 4-2-3-1, where you had, and again, this was smart because in buildup, they were more of a 3-1. So would have Raskin mostly as a sitting midfielder in front of the back three. So we basically would have Nygren right there with Raskin. And then when we would get problems was when Diomande would drop into midfield. And then that would be when you can see here, Engels would try to mark him. And then that would create space that would be problematic when one of their front three would drop into the half space and, facilitate buildup. So generally it worked. Like they really had trouble against this setup. I suspect they probably weren't prepared for it because we've been 4-4-2 for so long. I mean, you have to go back, I don't even know how long for us to be out of possession in something other than that. So I suspect that they weren't necessarily prepared for this with their patterns of play and build out. So to Alan's point, they were just going long because we were matching up, or the wide of the three were shutting down their wing backs, which they rely on in their build up. And because Nygren was basically man to man against Raskin, their midfield was basically not there to help it build up. So they were just kind of shelling long balls. So to me, it was almost a stalemate on a tactical basis in that first kind of 20 minutes. And then they kind of grew into it a little bit. And to Alan's point, I think they did make some tweaks then. And then that's when we were getting some of those through balls. And they had three really good chances before the red card. I would say they had the balance of play in that regard as far as quality from actually like opening up a defense. So that was what I kind of took away from the first half. Now, I will say that, again, this is the other thing from Rule. So this was the bad part. This is after the red card. So you can see they were in 5-2-3. And then when they went down a man, they went 5-1-3. And you could see this was a sequence of play. I mean, it just left a parking lot of space in midfield. You see Raskin by himself. You see the front three, and then the back line of five. And I mean, the entire midfield is wide open. And in this screenshot, you can see Kenny making a run, and then Nygren running into the space that he leaves with. I mean, the middle of the pitch just wide open. And I think this resulted in I think it was Kenny's shot, one of his shots that he fired from an angled shot that was on target. So this was a problem for them big time between the red card and the end of the first half, because the middle of the pitch was just wide open. And then, as Alan said, at halftime, they bring in Gassama for Danilo and they go 4-3-2. And that's what this screenshot shows. You can see, the bank of three in midfield and then the two pressing forwards. And I think, we generally had more problems against that. If they'd have stayed 5-3-1, I mean, we could have scored 10 goals. Who knows? I mean, it was going to be a complete free for all. So I just wanted to go over those because I thought those were tactical nuances. One that we did on the 4-2-3-1 out of possession that I thought really caused them major problems that they started to get a little bit of a grasp of before the red card. And then again, just to highlight some of the changes that Rule made intra-game that I thought were, reasonably intelligent.
Yeah, Alan, to pick up on some of what James has highlighted there, I guess it fits in with my sort of view of certainly the first half of the game, that the out of possession shapes that both teams were taking were almost as important or more important than the in possession shapes. And I say that because I really felt like in the first half we were consistently and constantly closing them down and winning the ball back very quickly, to the point where they were very rarely able to get out their first half in the early parts of the match. Do you agree with what James has observed there in terms of the the different shapes out of possession of the ball and how that maybe affected the outcomes of the game?
Yeah, I mean, if anything, the missed opportunity for Celtic was the 4-3-2 shape, which was, you know, a brave decision by Rule, you know, to keep two players high at all times, really, whilst conceding the wings. We didn't really exploit that as much as we should have done. But one of the most fascinating thing for me watching it back was actually the extent to which my memory of the game from watching it live was completely almost blown out the water when I watched it back calmly and analytically. I was incredibly frustrated the whole game, but I think that's just how I feel watching any derby match. And also there's so much nonsense going on as well. That tends to add to it. I mean, I think I even tweeted, or I didn't tweet, I put in our huddlebreakdown.com chat that at half time, you know, I think my one comment was Ralston's a real issue for us. And because what he'd done in the first half, he'd missed 3 tackles. Now that's a lot for one player. What a player might miss one every other game, maybe. To miss 3 in one half, and it all leads to breakaways up that side, and you sort of think he's going to get overpowered by Asgard and Magomas. He's not particularly quick, but he's certainly quicker than Ralston. You know, it just felt like we're going to get overrun on that side. But again, it's selective memory. It's, you know, it's the biases. I remembered those things. I didn't remember all the other things that he did. But the other aspect of it was that this narrative that Celtic were really great in the first half and that they were amazing in the second half. It's just complete nonsense. I mean, Celtic had a good 10 minutes when we pressed them really high and we turned the ball over and created lots of danger. But I think after the opening goal, we kind of, the old cliche, took our foot off the gas. We stopped playing with the intensity that we'd played up to the two. And then I think both teams then get spooked by the sending off in terms of how do we respond to this? What do we do differently? So I actually think that in the first half we were good in spells and we were good for a sort of 10-minute maybe before we scored, of really kind of getting in top of them, not letting them out, pressing intelligently and creating chances. But we gave away some really terrible. Well, one terrible chance was the Chermiti one. The other two that they claim were great chances. One was Raskin, who's shooting from a very wide angle. It's going to take a hell of a shot to score from there. And then the Chermiti chance from a set piece is that the ball's in the air up here, and he's right at the back post beyond the post. I mean, again, how are you supposed to hook that in? I don't know. So I would argue there was one absolutely cast iron big chance, massive chance that Chermiti missed. But otherwise, there were two kind of half chances, really. But that was, to me, that was more than what we should have been given up, really, against a team that struggles to create. And under 2 games under Danny Rule, had struggled to create against Kilmarnock, had struggled to create against Hibs. So, you know, that wasn't so satisfying. And then in the second half, you know, basically it was pretty simple stuff. As soon as they got the ball, they shelled it. And then, you know, Nick Walsh usually obliged with the free kick of some you know, conjured out of somewhere, or they got a throw in or a corner. And actually, most of their shots in that second half were, we went through this period of sort of trading shots from outside the box for a bit, both teams. The disappointment for me in the second half is Celtic didn't control the game better, didn't stretch them, didn't play a little bit quicker, but a combination of speed but with control. So be a little bit less direct, be a little bit more controlled, keep stretching the games, keep switching it from flank to flank, and just basically tire them out. And basically, you win the game by attrition. So I was a bit disappointed we didn't kind of do that, really. So, but this notion that they were amazing in the second half, I thought they were spirited. I thought they worked their socks off. Absolutely, you got to give them credit for that. But it was pretty direct, basic sort of second ball, you know, set piece orientated football that allowed them to get into it. And then, of course, you know, the penalties are a confluence of many weird things going on there. So yeah, that was it. So, but yeah, and a lot of things that really were just very different to how I remembered watching it live, if I'm honest. And I think once they scored the penalty, I don't think they had too many other shots after that, really. And it was the extra time was fairly comfortable once we got ahead.
Yeah, and that's just that. Sorry, real quick, just to amplify on what Alan said there, because I had the exact same experience in rewatching the game, and it was funny because I mean this is I joke, I talk about Derby dust, right? This game is like Derby dust on acid because of the Martin O'Neill effect. I think like it's everyone coming into this, including myself. I mean, it's got its own little thing going on that's just different than even the normal Derby expectations and the craziness that happens during it, and then oftentimes the craziness that happens after it, which is manifesting this week with all the refereeing stuff. So it's without going back and reviewing the game, it's impossible to really have a sense because there was so much going on emotionally, and it was such a dramatic game, and it really was a complicated game because of how many things were going on. To think that anyone's going to sit there and process all this in like an objective, measured way, a balanced way to analyze it, it's just impossible. So I agree with that. I mean, this was a case study type of game, and why going back and analyzing a game can, potentially draw stuff out that you didn't even remember happened because there's so much that happened during it.
I just would like to state for the record that I thoroughly resent what you've both said. I am fully able to objectively analyse the game throughout and post without watching it back. I have a totally accurate and non-biased recollection of every event in the game. Speaking of which, Alan, let's get on to the referee's performance. Nick Walsh has been the subject of much discussion for anybody who doesn't remember some of the more significant incidents in the game, that the decisions were in some cases dubious, where the first goal for Celtic that was ruled offside, why we'll get into, the Austin Trusty situation where he made contact with Jack Butland's head and the discussion around whether that should have been a sending off, the sending off for Asgard, the non-sending off for Cornelius. Those are only the ones that I can remember that come to mind. I'm sure you'll cover more, but Alan, your thoughts on not only the refereeing performance but the discourse around it post-match?
Yeah, I think mainly the latter is my focus, because if we, as a Celtic podcast, so we get into the individual decisions, we'll give a green tinted version of what we think those decisions are. I've listened to lots of blue and green versions of all these incidents that happened in the game. If I try and take a step back, it looks to me as if both teams could argue they got the wrong end of the stick on some key decisions. Shock horror. And that actually is a shock horror.
A poorly refereed game. Shocker.
Yeah, listen. So it's more the post-match reaction that I'm interested in here, if I'm honest with you. Listen, let's remember where we came from and where we are, because there's a lot of rewriting of history that's going on at the moment. I start looking at refereeing. Remember when the Rangers came into the Premier League, and they obviously weren't very good for a number of seasons, and Celtic were winning the league comfortably, and there wasn't a discernible pattern of refereeing decisions. But even if there had been, the impact would have been negligible, because the Rangers team were so far behind Celtic in terms of where they were. But obviously, once they started to throw money at it, around about sort of Steve Gerrard time, that coincided with Crawford Allen taking over as the head of refereeing, and it is actually as black and white as, if you start looking at refereeing and take that as your cutoff and look at what was happening before for the seasons that there's public data, and the seasons after, you get these patterns of assistance for one team, and this is public data. Anyone can look at this. And it's on a number of data points which are important. Things like, the relationship between the number of times a team gets into the box versus the number of penalties they get, both for and against. Which teams get red cards, penalties, those sorts of things. But it's not even just that. It was looking at when in the game did these things happen. Because not all penalties are equal. A penalty at 0-0 in the 89th minute is hugely significant. a penalty when you're 4-0 up in the 89th minute is almost irrelevant to the outcome of the game. So you can look at that as well. And if you looked at all of those metrics, looked at all of those scenarios and parsed them out over all the teams over a long period of time, you saw these statistically significant patterns. And by statistically significant, easy for me to say, what that means is that the outcomes, the statistical outcomes of the analysis were beyond the levels that one would expect based on the population of data that you have. And what that means, if I use shorthand, is there's something else going on that the data can't explain. And that something else going on is when the outcomes are always in favor of one team, does suggest, in the context of refereeing, there's something untoward going on. And why should that surprise anyone? Because the Scottish Football Association have minimal, limited controls around refereeing. Which teams they support, where they come from, who referees which teams, etc., compared to England or any other league in the world. I suspect the Scottish controls are very poor. Add into the mix the fact that they are very poor referees because they're part-time and they are refereeing full-time football. That is a factor. So these patterns of assistance for one club were statistically significant, proven beyond reasonable doubt for a period that the patterns were most noticeable whilst Crawford Allen was head of refereeing at the SFA. And the introduction of VAR didn't change that. It didn't change it, okay? And then what happened was a culmination of things. But if you remember a game at Hearts when John Beaton took it upon himself to re-referee a game from the VAR room, and Brendan Rodgers went on after the game and called out incompetence and was hauled before the SFA. Well, it may well be the case that some well-armed senior legal types with dossiers and so forth, had a bit of a to and fro with the SFA in Rodgers' defence. Just coincidence. A few weeks after that, Crawford Allen was gone. Right, he was gone. And we've now got Willie Collum in. Now, what Willie Collum has done is he's introduced to a number of measures which have changed the way, not the way that games are refereed, but changed the way that referees are assessed. Okay, he started to have a television program on Sky TV where the big calls are reviewed, and Collum gives his opinion on whether the decision was correct, whether the refereeing, and we hear the conversations that's going on, and all this is a huge step forward in transparency, and that was a big shock. I always remember the very first time that was in operation. Celtic played Kilmarnock in a home match. Kyogo Furuhashi got wiped out by the Kilmarnock goalkeeper, I think it was, and no penalty was given. And Greg Aitken, Rangers supporting person on VAR, that's the way it is, right? Only in Scotland, folks. His commentary that you then was surfaced on by Willie Collum. I mean, if Chris Boyd had been commenting on it, you wouldn't have got. I mean, I'm going to paraphrase. And he didn't say this, but it sounded like something along the lines of, "Get out, you cheating Fenian bastard." That was never a penalty. I was like, that was the essence, that was kind of the feeling that you got from it. He didn't say that. I'm not saying he said that, but it was kind of how it made you feel. And anyway, and Willie Collum took him to task. Now, the marker was set then that if you're going to make a decision that it does not stand scrutiny, in that way, you're going to be on Willie's TV program, and you're going to look like a complete, C in front of a lot of people live on television, and nobody wants that, right? And then they started to publish these KMI panel findings as well as a sort of second line of defence. These are not necessarily all referees; they're not necessarily all experts, but it's just another level of transparency from people within the game as to the decision. So the combination of all those things has served to put all the referees on notice that if you F up, everyone's going to know about it and you're going to get called out, and nobody wants to do that. So that has changed behaviour. And since that's happened, so we've now had a season and a season and a quarter of this new regime of transparency, is the referees haven't improved. And why would they, Dee? Why would they? Because what's changed? They're still part-time. It's still the same bunch of, referees that are pulled from a very narrow pool. Where are the old referees from Inverness? Where are all the referees from Aberdeen? Where are all the referees from Edinburgh? Why are they all from Lanarkshire? No. But anyway, so it's the same people. It's the same, officials, the same training, etc. And it's the same, fact that they're part-time. So the standard hasn't improved. But what does seem to have improved is that every team now seems to be treated the same. And that is a huge step forward, because we've gone from 4 years, and I know Celtic fan. This is, I'm just talking about the measurable time that was analysed, where it was clear one team was got the benefit of the doubt more often than not. And by the way, the benefit of the doubt in this instance doesn't mean to say that they got a million penalties, although they kind of did. It was more the lack of jeopardy. It was more the absence of jeopardy in terms of lack of red cards, lack of bad things happening, more than positive. So it's very easy to hide something that doesn't happen than it is to hide something that does. That now seems to have been normalised. And when I look at like the Yorkshire Whistle's analysis of decisions over a whole season last season, it was kind of what you'd expect. If it was just kind of normal distribution stuff. And so far this season, it's been the same. So I think this is a tremendous step forward. But of course, one set of fans, if you're used to operating in an environment where you are the favoured team, and the whole culture of the club is we are the people, we are the favoured team. It's the old cliche. Equality starts to look a lot like you're being victimised, and that's a very difficult psychological, hump to get over, if you like. And so that's one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it is, and we've talked a lot about in the summer about, the American takeover. Is it the 49ers? Is it a bunch of slum landlords, equity investors? What's their motivation? What's it going to look like? Are they going to be smart Tony Bloom types, be data driven? Are they just out to make a buck? Where on the spectrum are they? Russell Martin decision. Top players are bought. He's spending a fortune on players. No club has had a net spend like this in the history of Scottish football. So it looked like, they're really going all in on this. Are these players any good, or was Russell Martin just a dud, or was that a combination of both? And one of the reasons why there's such a focus, I think, on the refereeing decisions is that the alternative way of thinking of this is just simply too appalling for them to get their heads around, which is that, oh my God, we've spent all this money on all these players and a lot of them are not very good. And by the way, what are these owners doing? And who are these people that are now running our club? Because they're not Jimmy Bell, they're not, Walter Smith, they're not, all these kind of staunchies. They're just these randoms that are there to make money. And there was so much emotional capital invested in this takeover, and it had to work, and it had to be. This is the big. We are the richest club in Scotland, Timmy. We're going to be. We're the might of the 49ers. We're going to roll over everybody. And if the reality is that actually that isn't the case, and this is a fairly low rent bunch of minor equity investors from the States who just fancy a bit of getting into European football on the cheap and think they can turn a buck or two. And actually, it's not really driven by anything that's approaching a sort of data-driven smarts. And actually, we've just gone and spent 30, 40 million on a bunch of pretty average players. That's not a nice future, sort of short, medium term to look into. So I think that's why there's so much ridiculous focus on all these decisions that we're seeing now playing out in the media.
Yeah, James, I mean, I don't think I've heard in all the discourse about the refereeing performance on Sunday, I don't think I've heard any Celtic supporter come out and say they thought the referee had a good performance. So it's not as if just because the Rangers fans are upset with their perceived lack of good decisions that Celtic supporters are coming out and saying, well, we're completely happy with it, because the truth is neither group of fans are. I guess it comes down to refereeing competence and trying to call that out call out the incompetence where we see it. But my frustration with the whole situation is the whole debate, the entire debate seems to be around the ways in which Rangers fans feel they were wronged and the decisions that went against them. Where is the side of the discussion about the decisions that went against us? The supposed handball by Anthony Ralston that should never have been a penalty, the Cornelius tackle that nearly left Johnny Kenny with a broken leg. Where is the discussion within Scottish media around that? And I get that I'm probably putting you in a difficult position here because you don't see our media day to day, but I guess I'm just wondering if you can piece together why the outrage seems to be so one-sided as far as this is concerned, when actually I do think both sides have an element of a right to be aggrieved to some extent because it was a poor performance overall.
Yeah, I probably consume more of your media than I should for my own mental health, but it was such a poorly officiated game. It's just classic confirmation bias. I mean, it's there's some of them that like I'm open to the idea that was offside. I can't get an angle or a freeze frame that to me looks like it's clear.
Can I just say,
and
I'm going to set myself up here. The only way that is offside is if the linesman has two eyes like mine, and that is all I can say about it.
Or it's something as simple, and Alan has talked about this. I mean, this is Harry Brady on Celtic Underground has talked about this. I mean, the technology being deployed in Scotland is not of the rate of frame capturing that allows for an objective, clear and obvious error to be overturned if it's this far offside. That's technologically impossible. So by definition, because of the error rate that it has, the lack of frequency of the frame capture, if it's a hair offside by this cap, it's by definition not clear and obvious then. I mean, this should be like built into the rule. And I'm not even saying like I can't even find the one that they showed on TV that they supposedly drew the lines on, why it was from the angle they did it when there was clearly another angle obviously available. I don't know. Particularly given what Alan laid out relative to accountability, one would think it's because of incompetence. And given the way that these things happen with refereeing, that's kind of my default posture the vast majority of the time now. And again, from our side, it's not fun to remember these things, but you could argue we won last year's cup final on a horrible VAR screw up where Liam Scales probably should have been, had a penalty against him that would have given them a late, penalty chance. So, these things fall both ways. There was the Hitate charge that wasn't called that could have been a penalty. Somebody charged him in the box. There, you could say, and if they would have granted a red card for Trusty, you're probably not going to overturn that. He did, he wasn't horrible force and he wasn't bleeding or anything. But this goes back to Alan's point about the kind of the hypocrisy is, what's his face? The old center back going up and kung fuing a guy right in the face with his foot, Goldson, during that era. And that, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. There's pictures of Joe Hart having his head opened up from a foot that wasn't a red card. So I wouldn't have argued against that being called a red card. I don't think it would have been overturned had it been called a red card. But the Hitate wasn't called, and the offside, and the Cornelius, and like there were so many aspects of this game, and that's above and beyond all the niggly stuff called, and that every single one of them can be re-refereed. And depending on what color glasses you wear, you're obviously going to fall on one side or the other. That's normal kind of human way that we do these things. So yeah, I just think it was a mess. It was, and this kind of game, because of the way it was played and the environment, meaning more chaotic and guys flying around, you're probably going to get that many, a lot more physicality in those kind of events. loose balls and chaos leads to guys diving in. I mean, Jigba easily could have ended up with a red card. In one sequence, he had 3 diving, tackles where if it would have mistimed it a little bit on any of them, they could have been leg breakers. He didn't. But
to be honest, I think Tavernier might have sent him off himself. I think he'd had enough of him. But yeah.
But that it was just that kind of game, and then you put in a lower quality refereeing performance into that mess, and you're going to get just a bunch of mess, and then it becomes a Jackson Pollock painting or a Rorschach test of which side that you're rooting for. So I agree. Like Alan's point is, it's why the inflammation on one side in particular, and being that aggrieved about it. Because I think it's easy to be aggrieved. Both sides should be aggrieved because it was a crappy refereeing performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting point that you picked up about Trusty and saying, you wouldn't have not that you wouldn't have complained, but you wouldn't have been surprised.
Wouldn't have felt aggrieved.
You wouldn't have felt aggrieved if he'd been sent off. And I think that's where the whole VAR situation starts to frustrate me, because I think they don't use the clear and obvious thing often enough. And they also don't consider the fact that if this decision had gone the other way, would VAR have get involved to overturn it? And sometimes the answer to that is no, and therefore it shouldn't intervene when the decision goes the way it does. But we could sit here and talk till the cows come home about how bad it was and who's right and who's wrong. You're never going to get full agreement on those things. So let us know in the comments how right or wrong you think the decisions were, and we will take that as gospel. Alan, let's have a little look ahead to the Midtjylland game on Thursday. Obviously an away tie. How much has the recent changes to the way that we're playing and the sort of boosting confidence that seems to have come with Martin O'Neill and Sean Maloney coming into the team, how is that going to help us against Midtjylland on Thursday? Can we get our Europa League campaign even more back on track on the basis of this?
I hope so. So, but let's start off. Let's start off a little bit differently. I mean, this team, right, have lost one match so far this season, and they started their season really early, and they had to play lots of qualifiers to get into the Europa League. They've actually played 25 games, and they've lost one. They've lost one match so far. They've scored an incredible 65 goals this season, right? I mean, it's terrifying. So that's the bad news. And the top of the Europa League, whoever group stage, league stage, what have you, they've won all 3 games, including a 3-2 win away at Nottingham Forest. Two away wins, scoring 6 goals. So just based on those facts, it sounds incredibly daunting. But if you actually look at performance, it's actually a slightly different story. They've actually scored 65 goals off of around 49 xG, and they've conceded 21 goals off of about 29 xG. So they are experiencing some major positive variance there.
That's across all competitions, Alan, right?
Across all competitions.
Aberdeen last season on steroids. That's what it is.
It's just insane. So what is it about them that is either that would lead to you thinking, is that sustainable? I don't know. I don't honestly know. What is another fascinating fact is that for the first 12 games of the season, they played 4-4-2. 4-4-2 every single game, and then after the 13th game, they switch formation like every single game. Just about. The last 3 actually they've played a sort of 3-4-2-1, but they've played 4-3-3. They've played 3-5-1. 1-1. They played 4-3-1-2. They've really mixed it up in the next.
They played our favorite, Alan.
Yeah,
4-4-2 diamond, baby.
They played 4-4-2 in one game since then, and that's the only game that they've lost. They've gone to 3 at the back for most of all but 2 of the last 11 matches. So this might be, and again, I keep saying this, but the game on Sunday may not be a bad proxy for what we're about to face on Thursday, actually, because the style of play is actually quite adjacent as well. I mean, this is just the Danish league data. It's fairly superficial, and again, I won't dwell too much on this, but to say I think they're actually second in the league. They're not top, despite they've had a number of 4s and 5s in the Danish league, but they're actually second, I think, by a point. But if you actually look at their data, they're not that impressive. The only thing that they lead the rankings on in the Danish league is shots on target. They're actually third best on XG and fourth best on XG conceded, and they're pretty mediocre in terms of the number of saves that their goalkeeper has to make, and the number of fouls and tackles and all that sort of stuff. And they're actually, in terms of the sort of style of play, they're ninth highest in terms of accurate passes. So, and they're second highest in terms of long ball. So this is really the bit that I wanted to focus on, is more that style of play. That's really the kind of interesting part, I think, that we can focus on. So this is going to be a very similar, I think, matchup to, as I say, to what we had on the weekend there, where you're going to have a team playing 3 at the back who are going to be playing a lot of very direct passes. They're really not interested in intricate build-up at all. But again, bad news is where they do sort of match Celtic quite well, very much like Sturm Graz, is in their pressing game. They do press a lot. I mean, Celtic are probably the highest pressing team in the Europa League so far after 3 games, and this lot are, like Sturm Graz were, are not far off. So just in terms of volume of pressing and counter pressing, and that's off of less possession. I mean, they'll in the Europa League they're averaging 48% possession, whereas in the domestic league it's 52. So this is not a high possession team. They will not be playing intricate, build-up play. They'll be getting the ball forward pretty directly. If you look at them in terms of Europa League comparisons, so I'm looking at here the StatsBomb data that compares Celtic and Midtjylland. It's only over 3 matches. They're really, again, massively overperforming in terms of the outcomes that they're getting, because they're only averaging about 1 XG a game, but they've scored something like they've scored 8 goals, I think, in 3 games so far in the competition. So again, for ball progression wise, it's going to be a lot of direct play. Sadly, again, they're a team who are famous for generating a lot of chances off of set pieces. That will also be the case, I suspect, on Thursday. But they're really relatively unremarkable. And actually they profile very, very similarly to Sturm Graz. Now, I didn't think Sturm Graz were that mental as far as being direct and going down this sort of chaos ball route, but the profiles of the 2 teams are remarkably similar. And actually, they did play each other in the first game of the Europa League. And although Midtjylland won 2-0, the performance data was a coin flip. It was like 50-50. In fact, I think the XGs were something like 0.5 to 0.6. It was ridiculously low XG. Neither team really created anything. It looked like a horrible sort of mess of a game. So I think the risk is for Celtic under O'Neill and Maloney is that if we continue being as kind of direct, and again, this is nothing like as direct as they're going to be, it could turn into just one of these messy turnover games where it's all going to be about transitions and all going to be about who basically counters the best, etc. But I think despite their extraordinary record this season, 1 defeat in 25, 65 goals scored, I do feel this is not that dissimilar to the last matchup against Sturm. And although we squeaked that one 2-1, I would argue that Celtic were probably the stronger team. And if you look at the Europa League data so far, even though Celtic are like mid-table, or in fact lower table, we actually profile pretty high on all the metrics, and Midtjylland profile quite average really after 3 matches, despite the fact they've won them all. So they may still carry on this really hot streak that they're on, and they've got this striker that's got 13 goals in 13 games from Guinea-Bissau. He may continue to. He's only 21, 6 foot. He may continue to be hot on a Shankland, as we like to say, or not. I don't know. But I wouldn't be, despite their record. And I deliberately started off like that, just as a joke, to sort of scare everyone. It looks to me like we should be able to give these a good game, I would say.
Yeah, James, I've learned two things from what Alan just said there. One is I want to watch more of the Danish league, and the second thing is I'm a lot less confident than I was before he started talking. Where do you stand on Thursday's game and what you want to see us do and what you expect the outcomes might be?
Yeah, it's because it's away. I'm quite nervous, and I think the let's start with the positive. To Alan's point on, so I broke them down between because they are such outliers on set pieces, that in a scary way for us, is that they've actually on an XG from open play basis, they are 29th through the first 3 games as far as differential. So they're actually haven't been good at all in open play. Now, again, that's them playing Maccabi. They played Nottingham Forest, and they played Sturm Graz. So again, within the context of Europa League level, having played a Premier League team like Nottingham Forest, Sturm Graz are okay. We just saw them, and Maccabi's okay. So that provides kind of the level context. So these are not world beaters in any sense of the world from open play. They are world beaters when it comes to set pieces. They are, I interviewed Ted Knudsen, founder of StatsBomb, who prior to that was a set piece coach, one of the first pioneers in kind of taking American style set piece strategy used in basketball and even American football, which everything's a set piece in American football, every play. To a degree, and kind of bringing those ideas into football set pieces. And one of the teams that he worked with was Midtjylland, and Midtjylland has continued. And we talked with Thomas Gronemaker about his long throw philosophy, and taking them fast and being clever with them. And Midtjylland are a full-blown adopter of his way of doing it. So they create more XG from set pieces than they do from open play. So that tells you, and their average chance quality in the 3 games and it's only 3 games, but their average chance quality is over 0.10 per shot from set pieces. Just to put that into perspective, normally corners are like 0.03, maybe 0.04, and they're cranking out more than double that or even triple that. So they're getting a lot of production out of these. Why am I getting into all this? Because I get worried. We have a tendency, and we have players that have a tendency to do dumb fouling near our box. McGregor is particularly bad at that. Ralston can do it at times. Everyone can do it, but they tend to have a predilection where you're like, there's a cynical smart foul to take in dangerous situations where you'd almost rather give up a set piece than, a 2-on-1 or a 1v1 with the keeper. And then there's you're just dragging a guy down or you're diving in when you shouldn't. And I think, this is a team you do not want to do that with. You cannot afford to be giving these guys direct free kicks within the final third. They're going to be shelling it from all directions at all times. Whenever they have a dead ball, they're going to turn that into a set piece. The worst thing you want to do is give them kind of free ones from angles and from positions where they can, do real damage. So I suspect we'll create some from open play. I think that some of the chaos will work in our favor because they're not world beaters in that regard. I worry about them on the counter against us, and the set piece thing is a big problem. So, we'll see how it plays out. I think the other thing is, and I agree with Alan. Like Sturm Graz, they're a little bit. I wouldn't say they're like crazy pressers. They're just smart pressers and good pressers, and that's something that we haven't really stress tested yet with. Rangers didn't really set up to be a front-footed, aggressive pressing side. They did a little bit at times, but I suspect Midtjylland, particularly at home, will be a little bit more aggressive in that regard. So we're going to see what that kind of triangle of Ralston, Trusty, and Engels is going to be able to handle at this level, because I suspect that there are kind of off-ball will be closer to what Rangers set up, only just more forward, higher line, and a little bit more intense at times when it's smart. And these guys will have scouted us. These guys will know, what a smart trigger is, when time to press is, that kind of thing. So they're definitely on the, for those who don't know, this is one of the Matthew Benham clubs of Brentford, owners. So they come at this from a very, I would say they're kissing cousins of Tony Bloom, if you want to put it that way.
I don't want to put it that way, but thank you anyway. Alan, before we wrap things up, where can people find us, and what kind of content can they find us outputting over the next few weeks?
Yeah, so again, with the Europa League schedule being Thursday matches, we used to normally record at the time that the game is going on. So the next Extra Time episode will be on Friday, or we'll be recording it on Friday. So I suspect Andy will get that out sharpish sometime over in time for your weekend, for your morning, hopefully your morning Saturday coffee. And then obviously we've got another match at the weekend. So there'll be the usual articles from James and I, the usual stat packs, and there will be an extra bumper Yorkshire Whistler League Cup episode. Now, the Yorkshire Whistler, I only ask him to look at league matches, but such was the volume of contentious issues in this game and the publicity around them. I've asked him to take a look. I hope he'll indulge us in responding to them. I'm sure they will. And then I think we've got an international break coming up. That normally means that James and I can usually get some extra content out there, especially written content, because we've got a bit more time as we're not kind of analysing matches and so forth. So, there may be a few little surprises over the next couple of weeks.
That sounds exciting. I'll certainly be looking out for that because unlike you guys, I do my 1 hour a week and say, thank you very much. I'll catch you next week, which I will do. But before I go and before I say goodbye to everybody, I want to read something out to you that I think will give you a chuckle. So this is from Indie Kyla News, which I don't know how reputable it is, but it's a Twitter account with 663,000 followers. And they have said, tweeted in the last 2 hours, exclusive. According to sources, Everton are looking at the option of bringing Brendan Rodgers to the club as the new manager in the near future. EFC owners, the Friedkin Group, want exciting football at their new stadium, and David Moyes is on thin ice. I mean, what more can you say than that?
Oh no!
Good luck, Toffees, with that one.
Yeah, that does that mean that David Moyes will come to Celtic?
I hope not. Thank you, James. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Let's see how this week goes, and we'll catch up with you all again next week.